Sailing in sailboats has always been a part of Pinellas County since the turn of the century. Gene Fleming tells the story of the Clearwater Yacht Club in his own words.
Clearwater Yacht Club was organized in 2011. 100 years old in 2011, organized in 1911 by winter residents who were looking for a place to gather. They called themselves the gentry of the town, and they had sailboats and they wanted to race and compete. It's had 6 or 7 different homes scattered around the bay, on one side of the bay or the other. It's been here since '74, I believe, where we are now on the south end of the beach, on the bay side. And sailing and boating has probably been the predominant activity here throughout its history. You know, it was a sailing club and an active club for years and years and years. The annual Snipe Midwinter Regatta was held, and it's had its 75th running back a year and a half ago, which is a pretty amazing sort of thing. It's still a very active club. It's changed along with the way the community has changed. A lot more very active and really interesting power boaters that get out and go and do things. Sailboaters are here too. Folks that don't do boating at all participate. And much like with the Heritage Village project, the club's really happy to support the community any way it can, financially to the degree that it's able, and volunteers and those kinds of things too.
One of the early designers and builders of sailboats was Clark Mills, who had close ties with Gene Fleming's family.
Going back in the history of Clark Mills, and that's one of the most interesting things to me about this whole story is there's a very long association between Clark and my family. And it's kind of complicated, but I'll try to go through it as quickly as I can. Clark and his family came here earlier than my family did. My family didn't come to Clearwater till 29. And the way it came was my mother's father was the foreman of the Duval planing mill in Jacksonville, and moved his business along with a business partner here to Clearwater in 1929. Well, it happened that the business partner had a daughter, and Clearwater's a small town, and when a new girl hits town, you know, all the guys know. Well, the end of the story is Clark married her. So there was a long association between the family. So much so that Clark built his first couple big boats in the landing siding next to the lumber company, and we in those days milled the material that was used to construct them. And as it relates specifically to honey, the Snipe in question, that boat was planned well before World War II, and they bought the Juniper from which it is built and still is constructed before the war, and dried the material in the rafters of the mill during the whole war until both Francis, my uncle, returned. CV is his last name. And Clark returned, and then they built this boat that later went on to be national champion and high point boat for years and years, up until the 60s.
Sailing one of the boats the Clark Mills built, the Honey, was Francis Seavey, an excellent sailor who won many championship races.
Francis Seavey, my mother's brother, he came here relatively young. In 29, he would have been, what, 8 years old, 9 years old, something like that. He was one of the first people to sail a pram that Clark built way back as a young kid. He tells stories about the Coast Guard bringing him in from offshore in the pram. He said, "I didn't know I wasn't supposed to sail it that way." But Francis, who is, by the way, a very, very fine shipwright in his own right, was a phenomenal sailor, had a talent for it from day one, and has sailed all over everywhere. Was the national Snipe champion in 1951 in the Honey. Sailed in the Whirls in Havana. We have photographs of that, which we'll make available to Heritage Village along with the archive of all this stuff that's available also. But he and Clark remained friends throughout their lives, as well as the Levisons, who operated the sail loft out of Clearwater Bay Marina, and they were all friends. I had a laundry bag from the Levison sail loft I got as a kid from them as a Christmas gift. So good folks all the way around. My first experience sailing was in a Clark Mills built pram. The yacht club, when it was located north on Mandalay Avenue, had a big boat shed absolutely full of them. And when they got old and needed work, they would hand them out to kids willing to repair them. And Francis, my uncle, got me one and helped me put a new bottom on it. And I sailed it in his little creek, in Stevenson's Creek. And the way you learned to sail then with him is they pushed you in the boat and shoved it. And you either learned to sail or you didn't. They hollered at you from the shore. I kept that boat 2 or 3 years, and then finally, I have to confess, it met its demise not as a sailboat, but rather with an outboard motor on it in Crest Lake in North Clearwater. We shook it to pieces then. And I got a chance to tell Clark that story not long before he died. He got a big kick out of it, you know. As he used to say, he was famous for designing a boat that looked like a horse trough. I've been lucky enough to build or rebuild a couple of boats myself, so I know a very, very little bit about it. And I was in the process of building a dinghy for use by my family, and Bob Ress, who's very well known in the boating community around here, brought Clark around to my shop so he could see what I was doing. And it was very simple. It wasn't like Clark would do it, but for one thing, I was building a foam core fiberglass covered boat, which he wouldn't touch if he could possibly avoid it. And I was showing him how I was doing it and mentioned to him that I didn't have really any idea what I was doing, but I kind of was following along the lines of the pram. It was square-nosed on either end. He says, "Gene, I think you're doing fine." He says, "You just keep building until it looks like a boat, and then you're done."
Many of the boats built in the early days were handcrafted, one-of-a-kind vessels that showcased the unique style of the individual boat builder. Whether for sailing, fishing, or commercial use, they were built by craftsmen who took great pride in their work. Watch for more interesting stories about pioneer boat builders of Tampa Bay. Thank you for watching.